Hello, Cane Creek. This is Ms. Davis in first grade, and I'm going to be reading chapters 15 and 16 to you from our book, Wish. And I am reading in my classroom library today because your classroom is a wonderful place to read. So here we go, chapter 15. The next day before Sunday school, I raced to the fellowship hall where that garden of blessings was up on the bulletin board. I searched the paper flowers until I found mine. The other kids had made a bunch of flowers because I guess they had a bunch of blessings. But I had only made one, and for my blessing, I had written, I am healthy, because Audrey had written that on one of hers. I took my flower down, and with a purple crayon, I added, I have a dog named Wishbone. When I got to Sunday school, I tried to tell kids about my new dog, but it seemed like nobody cared. They were busy calling out sins for Mrs. Mackey to write on the bulletin board. Cussing, bullying, lying, disobeying your parents. The sins were flying around that room like blackbirds in a cornfield. Charlie, Mrs. Mackey said, can you think of a sin? I bet leaving your children behind so you can start a new life is a sin, but of course I wasn't about to add that one to the list, so I just said, no ma'am. What about kicking and shoving? Audrey said. Then Howard started muttering under his breath next to me, pineapple, pineapple, pineapple. And maybe it was because we were in church, but a miracle happened. I was able to push my temper down and put a lid on it. I smiled and clamped my mouth shut tight so I wouldn't say anything to ruin this miracle moment. And then another miracle floated through that Sunday school window and settled on my shoulder and nudged me to say, I shouldn't have kicked and shoved you like I did, Audrey. I'm sorry. Well, let me tell you, that took the wind right out of her sails. Her eyebrows shot up and her mouth dropped open, and then she said, that's okay. After Sunday school, on our way to the fellowship hall, Howard slapped me on the back and said, good job, Charlie. I told you that pineapple trick would work. I'd been counting the minutes until the last day of school. When it finally came, I skipped to the bus stop in Jackie's margarette boots. I didn't care that they were hot and rubbed blisters on my heels. I strutted up the aisle of the bus and winked at those giggling girls like Jackie told me to do. Just wink at them, she had said on the phone one night. That'll throw them for a loop and they won't know what to do. But some of those girls still giggled when I dropped into the seat next to Howard and handed him one of Bertha's banana muffins. Thanks, he said. Then he broke it in half and started picking out the raisins, placing them in a pile on the seat between us. Wishbone dug up some beans last night, I said. Uh-oh. Howard took a bite of the muffin and made a face. Then he fished a raisin out of his mouth and added it to the pile on the seat. Gus got mad, he asked. Nah, he just said I couldn't let him in the garden anymore. Bertha get mad? I shook my head. She told me a story about her cousin's dog who ate corn right off the stalks in her granddaddy's garden and got so sick he almost died. As the bus made its way down the mountain, I thought about my old school back in Raleigh. It felt like I'd been in Colby forever, and I hadn't heard from a single one of my so-called friends back home, except Carlene Morgan. She had sent me a postcard with a picture of the Capitol building where my class had gone on a field trip. You are so lucky you didn't have to go, she had written. It was boring, LOL. Jackie told me she had seen my best friend, Alvina, at the movies with some girls from our Girl Scout troop. Did she ask about me? I said. No, but I told her you were doing good, Jackie said. Doing good? Ha! How would Jackie know? She was too busy living her perfect life with Carol Lee to think about me. She hardly ever even called me anymore. One time when I was in third grade, I went with Scrappy to the cemetery to see where his daddy was buried. We found the moss-covered headstone that read Albert Eugene Reese. At the top, it said, gone but not forgotten. I wasn't even laying under the cold, hard ground like Albert, but I was gone and forgotten. Bertha kept telling me I should invite some of my old friends from Raleigh to visit me this summer. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but that sounded like a bad idea to me. What would we do? Watch the squash grow out of the garden? Stare at Pegasus on the porch all night? Where would they sleep? Squished in my little bed with me on my Cinderella pillows? No, those Raleigh girls would not have fun here in Colby. When the last bell of the day rang, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Every day I had counted the minutes until I could get back home to Wishbone. Bertha told me he stood at the door and whined for me when I was gone. That's the truth, she said. Cross my heart and hope to die. On the way up the mountain, I stared out the window while Howard told me about Burl buying a motorcycle and his mama being mad as all get out. Then guess what? I saw 3 birds perched together up on the telephone line along the side of the road. 3 birds on a wire was on my list of things to wish on. But it has to be exactly 3 birds according to Scrappy's friend Ray, and that's not as easy as it sounds. So I made my wish quick before one of them flew away. Chapter 16. Guess what? Bertha said when I got home. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out an envelope. You got a letter from your daddy. I did? I stared at the envelope in her hand. That was Scrappy's handwriting, all right. Giant wiggly printing, like a first grader wrote. I put Wishbone's leash on and took him out front. I sat in Gus's lawn chair by the garden and stared down at the envelope. Miss Charlie Reese. If Mama had sent me a letter, which she never would, she would have written Miss Charlemagne Reese to aggravate me. Then she would probably tell me goodbye because she was starting her new life without me. I studied the envelope some more. Wake County Correctional Center was printed in the corner. Well, now, that didn't sound nearly as bad as county jail. I think folks in the county jail have to stay for a long time. But if Scrappy was just getting corrected, maybe that wouldn't take too long. I sniffed the envelope to see if I could smell his aftershave, but I couldn't. I took out the folded notebook paper and smoothed it on my lap. Dear Charlie, it's your old Scrappy Pappy here saying hello and how are you? I am fine. This place is okay except for the lumpy gravy and lousy pillow. Jackie came to visit and brought me Hershey bars and toothpaste. I bet you are having fun with Gus and Bertha. Tell them I will send more money when I can. Love, Scrappy. I turned the paper over to see if there was more on the back. Nope, that was it. I looked at the word love. I traced the letters with my finger. Then I folded the paper up and put it back in the envelope. The next day, I was bored by lunchtime. I had practiced sit and stay with Wishbone. I'd helped Bertha inspect the okra to figure out how many jars we need for picking. I'd looked for 4-leaf clovers over by the back porch, but I didn't find one. Then I'd shared my peanut butter sandwich with Wishbone, and that was it. Nothing else to do. So I figured I'd ride Lenny's bike down to Howard's. I hooked Wishbone's leash on the handlebars, and off we went. When I got there, the Odoms' house was buzzing like a beehive. Cotton was making something with sticks and rocks in the small square of shade next to the porch. Burl and Lenny were over in the driveway, peering at the engine of Burl's motorcycle. Every now and then, one of them would bang something with a wrench. Dwight was tossing a basketball into the hoop on the street light pole at the edge of the yard. And Howard? I couldn't believe what he was doing. A crossword puzzle. Sitting on that ratty couch on the porch doing a crossword puzzle. What kind of kid does that on the first day of summer? Hey, he said, adjusting his glasses. Wishbone jumped on the couch next to him and flopped over on his side, panting. Hey, I lifted the hair off the back of my neck and fanned myself. It sure is hot, I said. Want to study for Bible detective? Howard asked. Bible detective? I almost said, are you nuts? But for once, I managed to keep my thoughts to myself, and I said, no, not really. I'll give you some of my Bible bucks, he said. I shook my head. That's okay. Then what do you want to do? I shrugged. I got a letter from Scrappy, I said. Howard shot straight up. You did? He put the crossword puzzle on the couch beside us. From jail? It's not jail, I said. It's a correctional facility. Same thing, Howard said. It is not. I'm pretty sure it is. It is not, I said, so loud Wishbone's head shot up and he looked at me like I was crazy. Pineapple, pineapple, pineapple. I did not want to get mad at Howard on the first day of summer. I must admit that even though me and Howard hadn't known each other very long, he could read me like a book. I could tell he knew I was wrestling with that temper of mine because he changed the subject and just said, well, that's good that you got a letter. He scratched Wishbone behind the ear. What'd he say? I wanted to tell Howard that Scrappy said how much he misses me and he can't wait to come home and watch Wheel of Fortune with me again. That he was going to cook up a fancy supper for Mama with candles on the table and Nelson on the radio, and maybe she'd wear that red dress he loved so much. And that when Jackie got her driver's license, he was going to let her drive all of us out to the country to buy corn and strawberries at a farm stand by the side of the road. Then we'd go home and have a barbecue out in the yard. And we might even hold hands and say the blessing like Howard's family did. But I didn't tell him any of that. I told him the truth. He said they have lumpy gravy and lousy pillows. I said, that's too bad. I almost told him that Scrappy signed his letter with the word love. But then that would probably sound dumb to a boy who gets loved so much every day of his life. Hey, maybe Mama will help us make cookies to send to him sometime. Really? Sure, Howard said. Want to go down to the creek? Okay. So me and Howard and Wishbone went behind the garage and followed the narrow trail that snaked through the cool, damp woods. I loved the earthy, mossy smell of the air and the soft tickle of the ferns that bowed down along the edges of the path. Wishbone trotted beside me, stopping every now and then to sniff at a tree or root around in a pile of rotten leaves. I wondered if he had been on this trail before. I bet he knew these woods better than anyone. Maybe he'd even slept under these trees. I wanted to take his leash off and let him run free, but I was scared too. What if he decided he'd had enough of me and ran off to be a stray again? When we got to the creek, Wishbone nearly pulled me in when he jumped into the clear, gurgling water. Howard and I took off our shoes and stepped from rock to rock while Wishbone leaped and pranced, sending up splashes of cold mountain water. This feels good, I said. I know. Howard teetered on the slippery rocks, and I was sure he was going to fall in any minute, but he didn't. Wishbone let out the funniest yips and bit at the water, trying to grab the tiny minnows that darted around the rocks. Look at him, we both said at the same time. I jumped off the rock to the edge of the creek and motioned for Howard. Come quick, I hollered. Hook pinkies. What? Hook pinkies, I said. We both get to wish. We do? I nodded. If two people say the same thing at the exact same time, they hook pinkies and make a wish, I said. Jackie taught me that. So Howard jumped to the edge of the creek and we hooked pinkies. I closed my eyes and made a wish. Did you make a wish? I asked. No. Why not? He stooped to swish his hand in the water, making the minnows scurry away. I don't really have anything to wish for, he said. I shook my head. How could anybody not have something to wish for? I mean, even if you just wished you didn't have a wart on your thumb or that you didn't have to eat oatmeal for breakfast, it seemed to me like you could think of something to wish for. Oh, good grief, Howard, I said. There must be something. Well, actually, there is something I could wish for, he said. So we hooked pinkies again, and Howard closed his eyes. Did you make a wish? I asked. Did you make a wish? I asked. Yep. I bet I know what it is. I can't tell or it won't come true, remember? No, you can't tell, I said, but I can. It doesn't matter if I tell. I didn't know for sure if that was true, but I think it probably was. Just don't say whether I'm right or not, I said. Okay. You wished you didn't have that up-down walk, I said. When those words left my mouth, I could practically see them hurtling through the air toward Howard, quick and sharp, like razors. Howard's face turned pale as a ghost, and his eyes flicked down to the ground. What had I done? Why had I said that? More than anything, I wanted to take those sharp words back, but I knew that I couldn't. It suddenly felt like everything was frozen in time. Just stopped, cold, dead still, like the creek water stopped flowing and the birds stopped chirping, like the clouds above us stopped floating over the mountaintops. Even Wishbone stood still as a statue beside me. Then Howard broke through that frozen curtain of time by grabbing his shoes and heading off up the path toward his house, leaving me standing there, ashamed and heavy-hearted. I sat on the edge of the creek and held myself a pity party. That's what Jackie calls it when I feel sorry for myself. For heaven's sake, Charlie, she said, stop having such a pity party. But I couldn't help it. Why had I gone and said something so mean to the only kid in Colby who was nice to me? The kid who wanted to give me some of his Bible bucks and send cookies to Scrappy. The kid who let me share my troubles with him. I pictured my clothesline full of troubles and saw myself pinning on another one. I stayed there by the creek, wallowing in my pity, thinking about how this day had turned out so bad. But then things suddenly went from bad to worse. A tiny striped chipmunk darted out of a rotten log beside the creek, and Wishbone bolted after it, yanking the leash right out of my hand. And before I could even get myself up off the ground, he had disappeared into the woods. Okay, that was chapters 15 and 16. I hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see what happens next.